because I'm going to be joined now by Yasmin Radjy, who I think you all know. She's been here before. She runs an organization called Swingleft. We've talked about that before. But Yasmin, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin. I'm so excited to dive into so much that's happened since our last conversation.
So start with this and remind everyone listening about Swingleft. What's the organization and what does it do?
So thank you so much, Edwin. So Swingleft, for folks who are unfamiliar, is the largest year-round organizing network in the country. We organize volunteers to have an impact in the closest elections, both at the federal and the state level, all across the country, by taking the highest impact actions, whether that's knocking on doors, making calls, sending texts, or writing letters. We funnel them to make sure they're taking those high-impact actions in the places where they can shift the balance of power at the federal or at the state level.
Okay, and this turned out to be a delightful cycle for us for so many reasons. Have you had time to yet dive into the data to see how effective your efforts were? What was most effective? What do you want to work on to be more effective in the next cycle?
Yeah, we're really, really proud. I feel like you were one of the few people who shared my optimism about this midterm cycle early on. It felt very doom and gloom out in the world, but I think you saw, as we and our volunteers did, a real opportunity. And I think in our last conversation, I mentioned that a lot of our volunteers were taking actions at or exceeding 2018 levels, and that's something that we were really proud of and ended up being true in our final numbers. So our volunteers and donors at the grassroots level raised $11 million for campaigns and for voting rights and abortion organizations. They wrote 5.6 million letters to voters, and this is mostly to young voters, voters of color, to encourage them to encourage them to get out and vote. Over 1 million of those letters were in Georgia just in this past final stretch for the runoff election. They made 1.4 million phone calls to voters in swing districts, and they knocked on over 500,000 doors in those swing districts. So, I say the numbers sort of line by line because I think it's really important, and I know we're going to get into some of the lessons here, but, 2018 felt like a lot of people kind of look at it as a flash in the pan, a year where volunteers really stood up, were fired up to win back the House and to fight Donald Trump by having that line of defense. And a lot of folks have sort of moved on psychologically from the power of organizing. And what we're seeing this cycle, what we saw this cycle, is that the volunteers and the grassroots leaders who continued to really fight on the front lines of these swing districts made the difference. And we can get into some of the specific districts where we are really confident that the reason why we won is because of a field margin. But I'll just name one such example because it's right around the corner from you, which is the reason why we have a Democratic trifecta now in Michigan, which is a huge deal, is thanks to 403 votes in one Senate seat that won that chamber. That's 0.009% of all of the votes for Senate candidates in the state. And then 765 votes in just one Senate seat that won the chamber. And that's 0.02% of total, House seats, 0.02% of total House votes. And that's just huge for me. We're talking about if volunteers had not gone out to support those state candidates in a state like Michigan, we would not have a Democratic trifecta. That is thanks not just to Swingleft volunteers, but the ecosystem of volunteers that did so much. So I'm just feeling really proud and really fired up.
Well, we have a special election coming in Wisconsin that is going to determine whether the Republicans have a veto-proof majority in the legislature, and that is going to be a very close election, and organizing is going to mean everything.
That's exactly right, and I think I'm so glad you brought up Wisconsin because that's another one of these states where there is no way that one could argue that organizing didn't make the difference because The reason Democrats blocked the Wisconsin Assembly Republican Party from having a supermajority is thanks to 2,993 votes in just 4 seats. I mean, that's just like a few weeks of really good organizing can get that many votes. And so I really hope that that your listeners feel empowered this election to remember that going out and doing the small bit that they can, change just a few votes. And getting up to 2,900 votes is not that much. And in a place like Wisconsin, that's not just important for the immediate of what we've already done, but as you said, that Supreme Court election is going to be really, really close. And not that many people vote in these special elections. And so I hope that folks are taking some rest for the holidays, but then ready to, fire back in, because that election is coming up in April and we're going to be all in for it.
Right. As when you mentioned Supreme Court, there are two elections in Wisconsin that everybody needs to know about. The Supreme Court election, enormously important, and a special election in the legislature. So both of them are going to be close.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true.
I'm, sort of profoundly worried about the partly it's the way social media works, partly it's the way political operatives work, but I'm very worried about efforts to divide America by race, by religion. I look at the way the Republicans are using the rescue of Brittany Griner, right? We made a trade. We got an American home from a Russian prison. In any other moment, we would cheer and celebrate. And instead, the right wing is saying, well, how come you picked a black gay woman who hates America to bring her home and left, a white man in jail in Russia? Something that was, the administration is trying to bring everybody home. You bring home who you can. You make the trades you must to do it. And instead of celebrating, they're doing this awful thing. And I worry about that. And this is, people are proud of their heritage. They're proud of who they are. And that is absolutely important and wonderful. The opposite side of that, though, is when you denigrate other people. And since Kevin Phillips first enticed the GOP to campaign, to make resentment the core of building majority, and he started to do that in the Republican Party in the 70s, our politics has grown more divisive than unifying. How does, and I have some thoughts on this, but I want to hear your thoughts. How does grassroots campaigning be an antidote to that? How does bringing people together to go knock on doors and talk to their neighbors help us move past that?
It's such it's an important both topic and question that I hope that we can spend a lot of time on over the next few months discussing, because I think it's not, an issue limited to any one moment. The Brittany Griner example is a powerful one, but there's dozens more that we could even be talking about. And to me, it's just, I think we've talked about similar themes before of just like people need to get off their computers, not permanently, just for the afternoon, and go and talk to other humans face to face and in person. And I know that's been really hard with COVID, with, everything that's been going on, and also, frankly, with how hard people are working right now and how tough things are with childcare and all the rest. But I think I'm old school in this way, which is I think that sometimes we overcomplicate what some of the solutions are to something as difficult and intractable as polarization. And actually talking to people is, face to face, and not sleeping on and giving up on persuasion, I think matters a lot. And that matters from a, tactical perspective of how do we make sure that we are bringing Republicans and independents onto our side. But even in the bigger picture, the more esoteric, sort of how do we heal our very fractured country, I think it's as important for that. One of the stats that I was most sort of moved by this cycle was looking at the difference in our, which of our volunteers from 2018 stuck around this cycle and which didn't. And the number that really stunned me was that people who are a part of Swingleft groups that meet up in person, groups that get together, groups that even during, the toughness of the pandemic were, they were still connecting in some way. Those folks were 4 times more likely to be involved this year than people who were volunteering as individuals. And I think that tells me something, that I think is actually related to this broader point about polarization, which is people need connection, right? People need, and that is what keeps them involved in the civic process. It's what keeps them involved and motivated, even in the moments that are really tough for our democracy. And it's also, I think, rebuilding that community fabric does so much for being able to actually heal a lot of the ways that people have sort of caricaturized the other side. And I'm not saying that, every civic institution is going to be a blend of far-right extremists and progressives. This is not like a Pollyanna comment, but I do think returning to real small d democratic habits, the mores and habits of public life that, de Tocqueville wrote about in the earliest days of our American democracy as being so important. I don't think that we should be sleeping on those. I think those are fundamental building blocks to be able to move past some of this. And then just one last point on that is long-term work. That is deep long-term work, and that's why at Swingleft we are year-round, long-term, small d democracy building. But in the immediate term, I think what's also really important to remember that this election was a huge referendum on the far-right MAGA Republicans all across the country. The anti-democratic people, the election deniers, we still have some work to do, but, people like Carrie Lake in Arizona who were going to be blockers to our ability to have a free and fair election in 2024, they lost. So I think it's also important, especially, as we hear a lot of noise online and a lot of real anger and polarization online, A, we got to get off the computer and talk to each other. B, we've got to sort of rebuild that civic fabric, rebuild those community connections. And C, we've got to remember that those extreme folks are the minority. And most Americans, even if they don't know that much about people different from them, there is an openness somewhere in them that we can tap into. And most people are not as extreme as frankly, as a lot of the Republicans that are in elected office right now.
So I love that. I loved all of that answer. I had Tocqueville in mind when I asked, but I also had the American sociologist Robert Putnam, who wrote, I think, 20-some years ago now, a book called Bowling Alone. And he sort of talked about America was knitted together by many opportunities of community building, like bowling leagues, that disappeared, right? And I think the right wing through organizing in churches, and then subsequently the left organizing in a million different ways, including the stuff that you do, is leave aside everything about who wins and who loses an election, is just in itself a magic tonic to our society. It's a very important part of community building that we have, as you said, we've neglected for a long time, but I see it coming back in ways that are so salubrious for us.
Absolutely. We had my first job out of college, as you know, was on the 2008 Obama campaign, and that was formative in many ways, including that one of the real mottos that we learned day one and that we reminded everyone training after training after training who joined us as organizers was, people walk into a field office, they sign up to volunteer because of Obama, they're inspired by him, but they come back because of the other volunteers and the organizers that they meet. They don't return based on, a concept. And so if they are not building real relationships, if they're not seeing that they can, make a real difference and they don't have kind of some connectivity, then it's just a one-time thing. And I think something that we are wrestling with for the long term at Swingleft is how do you build the kinds of volunteer experiences and the kind of authentic community in volunteer groups. And I don't think this is just Swingleft, by the way. I think Indivisible does some amazing work on this, too. I think some labor unions do amazing work on this, too. As you said, I think Putnam is right to talk about the importance of rebuilding institutions. And we're in a moment of deep skepticism of institutions. So it's okay for those institutions to be brand new and to be, bottom up. But I do think that is absent those, the kind of mores and habits of public life are not built. Even, small things like you learn how to, in a small group of people, no matter how much you like those people, there are arguments about how to build an agenda. How do you, should the meeting be 1 hour? Should it be an hour and 30 minutes? Whatever the case may be. When you're in a congregation, when you're in a union, when you're on a PTA board, you learn how to negotiate on those things. You learn how to disagree.
Or a family vacation.
Family vacations. Families are a fundamental institution. But even that, I think Putnam has talked about this at length even since he wrote Bowling Alone, which is the institutionalization in America includes people being more and more disconnected from their families. And so, you learn to negotiate when you're a part of a family or part of a community. And I think those are as important as figuring out how to fight, what what Republicans are doing in legislatures is also how to rebuild our small d democracy.
Yeah, so healthy for the country. And this is not left-right politics. This is social fabric building. Now, it happens on our side that we're building it and we have some policies that we care about. But the policy choices and the community building go together. And it's an antidote for a feeling that politics is a transaction. And that's the I show up once, I vote for you, you give me this. And it's not. It's a constant. It's not a transaction. It's a community, and you have to build it.
Totally, it's a habit and it's an action. Another writer that I think is so smart on this is Theda Skocpol, who's a contemporary of Putnam.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've read the opening chapter of her book, Diminishing Democracy. She's a sociologist, as you know, and she's walking through a graveyard in Maine with her husband. And she's walking through and seeing all these old graves. And she sees one for one of President Lincoln's pallbearers. And she's looking at this grave and she's seeing it's his name, his dates of life, and then about 5 or 6 different civic organizations that he was a part of. And she starts thinking to herself and speaking with her husband. She's like, I would never put, the American Sociological Review, an institution I care a lot about, I would never put that on my gravestone. And she gets into a deep analysis of what is the way that we engage with the organizations that we deeply care about. For many of us, it's just signing an online petition and then moving on with our lives. These are not places where we are, we are leaders as a part of building what that organization is. And at Swingleft, we really think that what our groups are is our magic superpower. It's not just because they take more actions and talk to more voters. It's because they're actually rebuilding that fabric and are building the kind of an institution and kind of organization that's more meaningful than, again, signing a petition and moving on with their days.
Yep. And I'm finding I'll just use the 2 examples I know best, Michigan and Wisconsin. The Democratic parties that are being built in those states differ from the Democratic parties of the past.
Totally.
Not that unions are still important, very important and honored partners in this, but the party isn't relying only on union organizing and big city, machine politics. Instead, they're doing the hard work of community building that you're talking about, creating multiple on-ramps for people to get involved, and then the community stickiness that says, we're looking out for you. If you want to get involved, here's what you can do. Come back tomorrow or next week. The door's open. We want you back. And building that neighbor-to-neighbor stuff, which then surfaces all kinds of other issues and opportunities. Oh,
totally.
There's a problem over here we didn't even know about. We can work on together. It's such a strength of this country when we do it well.
Totally. I think it's a really important point you're bringing up. And I think by far, two of the strongest state parties in the country are exactly who you mentioned, Michigan and Wisconsin. And that's because the 2 party EDs, Lavora Barnes and Ben Wickler of Michigan and Wisconsin, respectively, they're organizers. They understand, exactly as you're alluding to, they understand that the work of building power, whether at the state or at the federal level, it's long-term work. It is non-transactional work, and it's work that needs to be built with, the people that are most impacted at the center. And they are in both cases, rebuilding the sort of the institutions and the fabric of their states, bit by bit, and they're investing for the long term, and their incentives are for the long term. And that's something, we talk about a lot at Swingleft. We do a lot of funding of those 11 million of grassroots dollars that we raise for campaigns and for organizations. A lot of that goes to parties and to caucuses and to the organizations that work well with those parties and caucuses. And we ask the state party EDs, who are the organizations doing voting rights work on the ground or doing GOTV work on the ground that are really, really effective, that are trusted messengers in their communities? And we ask folks on the ground the same thing. And we invest in those because this is not that campaigns don't, many campaigns have some of the top talent really believe in this stuff. Their incentive structure is all to just build an operation over a few months and then to disappear. And then, the staff move around. And that is not a knock on any of the staff. It's just the way that these campaigns work. So having state party EDs like Lavora and like Ben, who are building with a sort of generational mindset, I think is critical, and it's in too few states. And so I think the more that we are doing that long-term rebuilding work and incentivizing donors and volunteers to really be a part of that process, I think the better off we'll be. Yeah. And frankly, it's not a new idea. Republicans have been doing this for a long time. So this has been their playbook for the long run, and we just need to get into that long game as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a way of, it's certainly how you win elections, but well beyond elections, it's how you build society. And I'm so proud of the work that you've done, that Lavora and Ben have done, but lots of people around the country have raised their hands and said, I'm not sitting on the sidelines. This isn't a transaction. It's my community. It's my neighborhood. These are my brothers and sisters. And you know what? We can't put our heads down and let, cynicism and despair determine who we are and what we do, which was the plan on the other side.
That's exactly right. And again,
so
I think
predict for me going forward, just for a minute, since we've just had this lovely conversation. How happy will America be when after 800 ballots, the Republicans figure out who they want to run the House, and then they spend their entire time ignoring the actual challenges the country faces, missing the opportunities that are right in front of us, all to talk about Hunter Biden for the next 2 years. Unless they still have some things about Hillary they haven't mentioned.
I mean, totally.
Seriously, Americans I think we're done.
Totally. And, I think one of my favorite quotes that I've read recently was from one of the economists at the American Enterprise Institute. This was in the peak of Republicans going hard on Democrats about how Democrats don't care about the economy and Democrats don't do anything on inflation and Democrats this and Democrats that. And you and I know exactly, as you said, that what Republicans were really trying to do was just to get control in order to have, hearing number 15 million on Hunter Biden. And the American Enterprise Institute, which, as you know, conservative, libertarian, very aligned with the Republican Party, one of their economists came out and said, I've reviewed the plans that Republicans have to fight inflation. Not one of them is going to do anything to combat inflation in 2023. And I think that just reveals it's not just that they are full of distractions once they are, once they have the control of the committees in the House, et cetera. But it's also in their policy plans. And so I think the more that we are reaching voters to spread the word about not just what Democrats have done in the past tense, although I think that's really, really important, but also to make sure that folks are totally aware that Republicans don't have a plan. Republicans are really good at very scary attack ads that are completely disconnected from reality. And so the more that we're doing that face-to-face, person-to-person, call-by-call outreach to make sure folks know that that's just a bunch of BS, frankly, then I think the better off we'll be. We obviously did that well this cycle, but we've got to keep doing that cycle after cycle because, as you said, people are done with this stuff.
Yeah. Well, as always, it is fun catching up. This is a local Chicago, small little like radio broadcast about politics. It happens to go out on the internet, happens to have a lot of people paying attention. But where else are you going to get Alexis de Tocqueville, Theda Gupcall, and Robert Portman in one conversation amongst people who are actually just doing political organizing? Come on, guys. You're getting your money's worth on this show.
Exactly. Edwin, it's always such a pleasure to be on with you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that you're doing, the level of conversations that you have on the show, and excited to continue it. We're going to have more and more and more to debrief because there's just so much work happening, and excited to celebrate it together and to talk about the challenges ahead. All
right. Between now and when we next speak, have a lovely holiday and a great start to 2023.
Likewise. I hope you and your family get some rest, and then we'll be right back at it in 2023.
You bet. All right, everybody. That was Yasmin Radjy, Executive Director of Swingleft. We're going to take a break. When I come back, I didn't mean to interrupt you before, 773-763-9278.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.